Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I want to talk about equity. This is part of my collection lesson series. Anything on this channel is not advice, and let's get going. So I want to talk about equity because it's a very interesting topic, and I find that it's only talked about mostly in a mortgage. And I want to talk about it because it's an interesting conversation, and I've had a few conversations with friends and family and everything that will justify debt by saying they have equity. And I want to get into kind of two ideas here because, people will say, well, you got to live somewhere and then you got to either pay rent, which you have no equity, or you got to pay a mortgage, which then you, at least, the principal that's there that you're paying has equity. So I want to talk about this because I fully feel and believe that equity is just a form of basically like toning down the idea that you have no debt, right? It's just debt justification. That's all that I believe that equity is. So let's get into it. So I talk about equity. Most people will say, a house. We'll go with a traditional house, right? You have a house. Let's say it's valued at 300K right here, right? That's the value. Now, usually you have a down payment to buy the house to have the mortgage. Right? Usually that's 20%, something like that. Let's just say you put 10% in, so now the mortgage is 270, right? Something like that, right? So you put that, in, and your mortgage is 270, and then there's the whole when your mortgage goes to zero, that's the best case scenario. So you got a mortgage for 270, the house is valued at 300. Math will tell you, that this is your equity. 30K of equity. When you buy a house, this is only my experience in Canada. Let me turn on my light because it just turned dark here. When you buy a house in Canada, you basically pay nothing. There's a little bit of upfront costs, such as a home inspection. You don't pay your realtor because the seller pays the realtor, and so you have maybe some closing costs, some lawyer fees, whatever. That's usually pretty thin. We'll just not include that in this calculation, even though it would help my method to be more proven. So when you buy a house for that's worth 300K for 270K, you have the 30K down payment. I think everyone gets this concept. This is a traditional type of way of getting a mortgage in a house, usually. Now, if you just instantly buy the house and you instantly sell the house, what happens? Let's say you sell it, the next day for exactly what you paid for, 300K. What will you get back? Will you get 300K back? No. Will you get any, taxes taken off or any of this? No. You're not selling this at a gain, you're not selling it at a loss. I'm not including the tax advantages here because that depends on what you're doing with your house and that type of thing. And I'm not a tax consultant or an accountant myself. Let's just say that you did this. What's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is you're going to lose about 6%, on the value of the home. What does that 6% cost you, right? So if we take, if we take 300K times 0.06, you're going to lose 18K. Negative 18K. You're losing about 6% because you got to pay, it scales in depending on how much the value of the house is, but we'll just stick with the flat 6 because, we'll include some of the, stuff that you have to do to sell it, such as maybe repaint the walls, which doesn't cost much, and then you got to get the lawyer to close it, and you got to get 2 realtors you got to pay for, and you got to list it and all that stuff, right? And then if they have some demands, when the other person buys it, you as a seller deal with that. You buy it one day, you sell it the next day for 300K, and people will say, oh, did you walk away with money? If you walked away with money, you had equity. It's like you put 30K of a down payment down, now you're walking around with minus 18K. It's like, oh, look, you got 12K back. That's great. You wouldn't have gotten that back as a renter. It's like, no. But if I would have rented, I would have still had 30K, right? So this whole thing in the middle here that people call equity is just a fake fluff number, right? Because they don't include what it takes to sell. People will buy stuff and then not include what it takes to sell, how to get out of that, right? What if you need to sell it instantly right now? Well, then you got to lower that price to 300K to make it more attractive for buyers to come and get it. Let alone you're losing 6%. What is that 6% on your down payment? What percent did you lose there? That's over a 50% loss. A 50% loss would be minus 15K. So what'd you lose here, right? It's ridiculous. People will say, oh, I have equity in the house. I would have... It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you didn't have equity in the house, if you just rented and you still have 30K down payment, you still have 30K. Chances are you're making money with that 30K investing. That's the whole point, right? That's what I talk about in other videos, right? So I believe, equity is a fluffy, fake number for a lot of people. People will say, oh, I bought my house for 200, I bought my house for 300, I put 50K in, now it's worth 250, it's worth 350, whatever. It's like, well, of course it's worth that 50K more. You freaking put it in there. But if you put it in there, and then you take a 6% loss of the entire thing, depending on how much you put in versus how much is left on the mortgage, you take an extra exponential loss in a percent value, just the same as this. I didn't lose 6% on 30K. I lost over 50% on 30K, right? So I hope you can see that. And it's interesting when you take this concept to something else. A car, right? Let's just scale it down. So you want to buy a car. Car's worth 15K, right? Buy the car. Let's say you put it, let's call down payment, about half. So you put 7,500, right? So then that means, in the same scale of things, you got a car that's worth 15K, right? You got financing that you got 7,500 because you got, you paid 7,500 down payment. And then you got the zero, right? That's the best case is you own your car. Well, do you say I have $7,500 of equity in between what it's valued and what it's, what I have left in it? It's like, no. Why do you do that? Equity is just a fluffy freaking number. It's just a debt justification is all it is. You don't say, oh, look, I got lots of equity in my car. Let's take that entire idea. Let's buy a pack of gum for $4. Buy a pack of gum for $4. You stick it on your credit card, $4 right here. Then you have like, well, I have $2 to pay my credit card bill instantly, and over here is zero, right? That means you own the pack of gum. You don't say I have $2 equity in my freaking gum when you pay with your credit card because you paid $2 on the credit card and blah blah blah. You don't get it. You say it's funny when you're financing stuff, when you're in debt, you'll justify saying I'm building equity. It's like after you own it, right? After the mortgage goes away, you own the house. You don't say, oh, I have 300K equity. No, you just say I own the freaking house. You don't pay off the car and say, oh, I have 15K equity, right? You say, no, I got 15K worth of car. I own the car, right? I own the pack of gum for $4. You can't say you own the pack of gum for $4 if you don't have $4, but you don't pay off the $4 of gum and say I have $2 of equity in the gum pack. Like, what the frick are you talking about, right? And it's like, it's interesting when you do this, right? I've had conversations with people, they're like, oh, how much did you sell your house for? And it's like, well, if I bought the house for 300K and I sold it for 270, right? It's like I took a 30K loss, and it's like, well, but the mortgage was 250, right? So you had equity in there, and then you walked away with 5K, so it's like you made 5K. It's like, no, I freaking lost 50K. I lost my entire down payment, plus I lost all the principal to interest that I paid monthly that we're not going to talk about and go back into, right? All that, stuff that, like, when you pay, like, a $1,500 mortgage, 700 of it goes to principal, and then 700 and 800, whatever goes to, usually it's more, 800 goes to interest. You don't talk about the amount of money that you lost here that you just threw in a fire. No, you're like, oh, well, I could have been paying $1,500 rent. Yeah, and I could have had 30K on the side or whatever as well. So if you think of equity as just a justification for debt, because that's what I fully believe it actually is, it's like people will say, and they'll justify it, and they'll say, well, to have a business, let's say, I don't know, a car business, I need to go, take $1 million of debt, and then what, you say that you build equity from when that $1 million, one, two, three, when you, between the $1 million and the zero, you're like, oh, my financing is here and here. This is what I call equity now. I have equity in my company. No, it's like you got freaking debt, and you're justifying. You don't need $1 million. You don't need $500,000 of debt to make a business. I can, people make businesses, cash flow businesses. There's like online businesses, models, and everything where you don't have to take on debt. You could be like, you buy here, you sell here. It's like drop shipping. You could do stuff on Amazon. You could go to garage sales. You could scale it without having debt, right? Like these things can exist without debt. You can buy, let's say you have 300K in the bank, right? You have 300K in the bank. You go, you buy a house. worth 300K. Do you say I have 300K of equity in the house? It's like, well, no, I own a house valued at 300K. I own 300K worth of house, right? It's interesting that the whole equity thing goes out of people's minds when they own it, and it doesn't apply to these tiny little things of financing here and there. And I just think that's, you can actually build cash flow stuff with cash, right? I'm not saying save up 300K. I'm saying, like, what I'm doing anyway is basically investing, saving up to 300K, making that multiply, compound, and everything. Start business models, start online business, everything. Like, start, whatever you need to do. You can invest in those. Invest in real estate business if you got money like this, right? You want to have some market exposure to multiple things. But it's like, you could do this all completely debt free, and you probably wouldn't even say things like, oh, I got equity in this, because you don't have debt, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have financing, you're not taking off financing on a car. You're not. And it's interesting, like, it just blows my mind. It's like, people will be like, I have 100% equity of the car because I didn't do financing, but I put it on my line of credit. It's like, what's the difference? So I just want to share that with equity, because it's been coming up a lot with family and friends and everything, and people just don't get the concept of what equity is. It's just justification for debt. And it was really interesting talking with family and friends about this model, where it's like, people don't, like, they'll be like, oh, I put 30K in, and then I paid down the mortgage a bit, and then I sold it for down here at 260, but I walked away with 5K, and they're like, oh, you made 5K. It's like, no, I lost 50K or 5K, and I got 5K back, right? You don't be like, look at the car situation, right? One last time. Car situation. You buy it for 15K, you have a $7,500 loan, you don't sell it the next day for 15K, right? Pay off the loan of $7,500, and then walk out with $7,500 and be like, oh yeah, I got $7,500 out of the deal. I got $7,500 cash. You don't say that, right? It's weird. Why would you say that? Pay off the loan, you came out with the cash that you put in. So what does it matter if you paid down the 75 to 7 or 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 grand? And you walked away with the 10, 12, 13,000. If the car was 14, if the car it got devalued. If the car was 14K and you walked away with money, people think that's a good thing. It's like, well, how much did you put into it? How much you put into the house? That's the thing that matters. You don't say you got equity in the gum because it's half paid off, because you paid off your credit card of $2 and waiting for the next 14-day cycle because you're playing the game of, the grace period with your credit card because you're like, I get points. It's like, you don't play those games. You just pay for things in cash. You got the money. Right? You don't have to justify to yourself, justify to your friends and family that you got equity in things, right? So that's what I want to say about equity. I think it's just fluff. It's almost as fluffy as net worth, right? It's like, you take $1 million, you buy $1 million building, you're like, I'm a millionaire. It's like, yeah, but you can't afford anything because you also have debt, right? Well, what's my asset? My asset's my house. No, it's not. A liability's the house, right? Unless you're like making money from it, right? But it's crazy. It's just crazy, right? So wanted to share that with equity. Hope you guys are doing well. Thanks, and talk soon.